Welcome to the New Hope on the Go podcast, a place where the good news of God is shared with you, making it accessible anytime, anywhere. Our mission is to strengthen our spiritual connection with each and every listener, making you a part of our journey. Podcasts offer unparalleled convenience, allowing you to listen on any device, whether commuting, exercising, or relaxing. With over 100 million listeners monthly, podcasts have become a global phenomenon, providing a wealth of knowledge across various topics, from science to spirituality. You can always find something that piques your interest. New Hope Olympia podcasts, including our In the Lion's Den series, are available on all major platforms, so you can easily tune in whenever you choose.
This is the Lion's Den podcast series. Our podcast, The Lion's Den, draws its name from the biblical story of Daniel in the lion's den. Like Daniel, we aim to navigate life's challenges with faith and trust in God. One of the most loved stories from the Old Testament is the story of Daniel in the lion's den. The story starts when Daniel was just a young boy. However, by the time Daniel was cast into the lion's den, he was an old man. Many things happened in Daniel's life, but he continued to trust and serve God. Interestingly, I share a name with the main character of the lion's den story, Daniel. I am Daniel Scrivener, the son of New Hope Olympia's founding pastor, Del Scrivener. This personal connection to the biblical story inspired our podcast's name and mission. Our podcast will discuss everyday issues that could devour you without God's help. Our format will include personal anecdotes, guest interviews, and deep dives into biblical teachings. Thank you for joining me for this Lion's Den podcast episode. Your presence and support mean a lot to us. We hope our podcast has been a blessing to you today.
Dad talked about Revelation in his latest message, and the rapture is somewhat, even within the church, it's somewhat of a controversial topic, or it has been all through the years. It's, well, let's just not talk about it, is sometimes the motto, the goal. Revelation, and the book of Revelation in the Bible can be scary. There's all sorts of movies and books that have come out, some a little bit accurate, some very inaccurate on the book of Revelation. And Revelation tends to scare people. It deals with scary things and end of the world, end of the world as far as our understanding of it in the here and in the now. Is it the days that come and the challenges that we are faced with and our loved ones and our lives that we lived, just sort of day to day, and we get lost in our struggles and in our goals and in our regrets and all of that. And that at some point, that according to the Bible, if you believe the Bible, and I do, all of that comes to an end, and God has the final say, and He will deal with those that got away with murder, and use that as a phrase for people that got away with crimes, people that did terrible things that were never punished. It's reassuring in a sense to know that at some point justice will be done. It's also scary in another sense to where is my hope in all of this end time talk. And so the rapture, as I said, there's been several movies on it. Back in early 2000s, there was a really good series that came out on the Left Behind series. So these movies that came out in the early 2000s, Left Behind series, Kirk Cameron, you may remember him, TV star, Hollywood. I think he's still involved actually in a number of different movies, but he was involved in a series, Left Behind series. There was 3 of them, and they were a little startling to many people. It's something that a lot of people just don't like to think about, is what happens tomorrow, what happens next, and we like to focus on in the here and in the now, and sometimes we are more nostalgic for perhaps better times or different times. And so the end times is something that a lot of people tend to avoid and want to avoid. And it's uncomfortable to talk about. It's uncomfortable to think about. But, nothing lasts forever, as we all know. There's something I wanted to focus on from my dad's message, and that was Maranatha. But boy, I bet I pronounced that incorrectly. Maranatha. And it's this, Jesus is coming. Hang in there. And as he alluded to in the first century, the followers of Jesus, of this new way of doing things, this new church, were up against all sorts of pressures, and Paul wrote many of his letters from prison and endured hardships of all kinds that a lot of times we cannot relate with. Some people in some parts of the world certainly can. They are persecuted for their faith. Some are even killed for their faith. But in a larger sense, say in the Western world, the things that we deal with, we have it quite comfortable in a sense, is that we go to church in air-conditioned buildings. We can turn on the TV and watch a sermon. We can order food. There's all the comforts and luxuries. And even when we are struggling financially and going through difficult circumstances, to compare our situation with where we're at with the rest of the world, there just really isn't any comparison. In the Western world, we do quite well, even if we are struggling individually with where we're at, comparatively so. We're not walking miles and miles just to find water. We're not wondering where our next meal is coming off. And although sometimes there is a hunger crisis for many, so I'm not meaning to generalize. I'm just simply saying that the struggles that the first century church went through, first century believers went through, they were dealing with a dictator, a Roman emperor that wanted to kill them, wanted to sacrifice them to lions, and all of these things that they had to overcome, all these disciples dying for their faith, being martyred for their faith, and just simply on the threat of either you recount and say that you did not find an empty tomb and that Jesus did not rise from the dead and we'll let you live. And they went to their death in a very painful way because it was the truth, and they were willing to die for their faith. And so they're living under this dictator, the Roman emperor, and they're still calling, the Apostle Paul is still calling people to honor the emperors. And so look at our here and now, and in today's society, our politics is so corrupted. Our politics, the way that we view each other with suspicion, that it used to be, didn't matter whether you were a Democrat or a Republican, it didn't matter the political party. We used to be able to see each other as friends still, even though we disagreed with things. Now it's different. And there's all of this tribalism. Excuse me, there's all this tribalism involved where if you vote this way, you're no longer my friend. There's families that have even, marriages that have even broken up over that. We're just not seeing the love that that Christ called us to exhibit and to show. And as the rapture approaches, as the end times, just an interesting aside, people used to mock the Bible, mock Revelation. There's a passage in Revelation, and I don't have it in front of me, and it deals with the two witnesses that, after the rapture happens, and everyone is perplexed and wondering what's going on, God sends two witnesses that will be at the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. And there's much debate on this, whether it's Enoch, whether it's Elijah, whether it's Moses. But two witnesses will be there, and the text says the entire world will see this, and will see it live. And there used to be sort of mocking and scorn about this even 100 years ago. Well, how is that even possible? Jerusalem is thousands of miles away. No one could possibly see this live, and we certainly can now. We have the technology to do so, and it was just like the mark, is that people will receive a mark on their right hand or in their forehead that they will not be able to buy, sell, or trade without it. And, how is that possible? We have the technology now to do that, and so we see what was written. God always has the final say. 2,000 years ago, writing into the future, into the here and into the now, even speaking in His Word about the importance of washing our hands and that the life of the flesh is in the blood. God mocks the wisdom of man, that even his foolishness is greater than the greatest wisdom of man. And time again, He has proved right by His Word, that this Word has stood for 2,000 years. Well, in this podcast, we're talking about, and I am mentioning Dad's reference to the rapture. I'm also mentioning his reference to a pilot that was an interesting story. Go back and watch the message if you have not yet seen it, on the Great Evacuation. Jesus is fixing to win. He alludes to this interesting story from 1970, an RAF pilot that disappeared chasing an object. There's much debate about what that object was. A pilot has come out and said in 2014 that, well, he was the one that was being pursued. But this exercise, military exercise that was taking place, and this pilot disappears. The plane is found intact, remarkably intact, the bottom of the ocean. And just like a month later or so, and the canopy is closed, the pilot is missing. It was just an interesting aside that Dad focused on in his message. But where we are at today, where you are at today, I just want to say welcome. I want to say that there's much that we are going to be focusing on over the next several episodes of the Lion's Den podcast. And again, the Lion's Den refers to our financial hardships, our family struggles, the strife within families, things that we're waiting for God to work through or deal with, or God's waiting perhaps for us to deal with. And maybe you're tuning in just out of curiosity. What is this Lion's Den podcast? What's this stuff on Revelation? I would encourage you that rather than avoid it, if you are exploring and you can look around us and you can see your fingerprint that's different from another. You can see the diversity of creation, all that is unique. You can see the strife in our world. You can see the confusion and the fear that is on many people's faces. There's so much uncertainty and fear in our world, and people are looking for hope. And God's enduring promise is that He is a God of hope. And no matter where you are at, first of all, I just want to say, welcome to this program, welcome to the podcast. And second is that you are not alone. You might feel alone in the things that you're dealing with. And Dad mentioned Maranatha is this, Jesus is with you, hang in there. And I think his 2-minute message is if you are sick and on a hospital bed, and you are looking for hope where there is none. And I've been there. I've been in a hospital bed dealing with an unknown condition, staying several nights, not knowing what was going on, and it's lonely, isn't it? Have you ever been there? Isn't it lonely in those moments where you need a friend, you'd like someone to text, and that text is not there. You'd like someone to visit, and that visit is not there. And it's those moments of loneliness that, gosh, it really shapes our identity. And truly, we reflect on what we believe in and why. That the pithy sort of philosophies that we have clung to, when the chips are down, what really matters is what truly do we believe in? What is real? What is truth? And it just sort of reminds me of this exchange Jesus had in the Bible when he's being questioned by Pontius Pilate. The Jews have handed him over to Pilate, and Pilate wants to release him. He says, I find no basis for a fault in this man. I want to let him go. And they're just shouting, crucify him, crucify him. And, Jesus tells Pilate that everyone that believes in him is on the side of truth. And Pilate retorts back, what is truth? Is that we've defined it in this age of reason. We've redefined and reevaluated. We can't even identify what truth is. Everything has become subjective. But when you're in a situation where, in that hospital room, going through that divorce, losing that job, struggling paycheck to paycheck, that sort of coffee talk, everything is subjective, just goes right out the window, and you really ask yourself, what do I believe in? And why? And maybe that's why we're here right now. Maybe that's why you're tuning in and you're wondering, what is this podcast about? And everything that I'm going to be speaking on in this podcast over the next several weeks and I guess what is fuel for it are things that I'm walking through. And I've been in that hospital bed. I've gone through that financial struggles. I've gone through the family strife. I've gone through, gosh, if you're human, you're going through, if you're not in a storm, you're coming out of a storm, or you're about to enter one. As someone said, you're either in a storm, you're coming out of one, or you're about to go in one. And gosh, it's just something that we could all identify with. And so when you look at the Bible and you look at the book of Revelation, yeah, at first glance, gosh, it could feel and look scary, especially when Hollywood does one of their works on it. Let's scare people even further. It's just, But the rapture, as Dad alluded to, is something that, even though that word is not in the Bible, neither is the Trinity, the word Trinity in the Bible, but God the Father is mentioned, God the Son, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, and that is where the word Trinity comes from. Same with the rapture, is that it's a modern word to express a catching away, prophesied by Jesus, prophesied by His Word. One day that will happen, and it's meant to be a source of encouragement. Gosh, that when we're going through all of this, just think, being on the Titanic. I mean, isn't that in a sense where we're at? That everything around us looks great. Everything around us looks luxurious, but we don't realize under our feet is carnage and trauma, and we are on sinking sand. And wouldn't it be nice that sinking sand, wouldn't it be nice if we had a rescue? And we do. And that's what God promises. And so this, again, is our pilot episode of the New Hope podcast, the Lion's Den podcast. And I am your host, Daniel, son of Del Scrivener of New Hope Christian Fellowship. I encourage you to tune in. This podcast will be weekly. And the goal is to keep it somewhat at a reasonable length of time, probably 15 to 20 minutes going forward. Today might have been a little bit longer, but I just want to welcome you. I want to say hang in there with us, and I encourage you to take a listen to our weekly messages, and I hope that you have a great week, and I will talk to you again soon. Take care.
If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at newhopeolympia2020@gmail.com.